Oh, hey, first graders. Mr. Height, your science light. Getting ready to go on a cruise here pretty soon. Um, that's a big boat, isn't it? I mean, that weighs thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds. And I always wonder myself, how in the world does that thing float on water if it's so heavy? Because don't heavy things sink? You know, light objects float, heavy things sink, right? Big objects sink. Small objects probably float. Isn't that the way it goes? So you think about these huge boats, like these cruise ships. Look at this. This is one of the largest ones in the world. And how does this thing stay afloat? How does it not sink? We're going to investigate that today. And we're going to find out. We'll do some live sinking and floating, but I also have a digital site that we'll take a look at and do some predictions. And that's what I want you to do. I want you to predict what items will sink and float, and also have some discussion. What makes an item sink or float? So I have some water here, a little water bucket. You can see where the water line is, out right here. And I'm going to pull some objects out of our bag of fun that we've been using when we did some of the different things. Grab a couple. Couple items here. And we'll see if they sink or float. And then we'll do the digital site. So as I'm getting some objects out, I want you guys to think, what makes an object sink or float? What does it have to have? Let's pull some different items here. Okay. So my first item is I'm going to use that weird bouncy ball. It kind of bounces all over the place. It doesn't kind of bounce straight up. So what do you think? What do you think the weird bouncy ball will sink or float? What do you think we'll do, and why? Why do you think it will sink or float? You guys can discuss that together, and then I'll drop it here. All right, 3, 2, 1. Whoa. So very interesting is that it's not on top of the water. It didn't sink all the way down, but it's not floating. It's kind of in the middle. Most of it's underwater, but then the top is floating up there. So very interesting. So it's almost like a little bit of both. Why didn't it sink all the way to the bottom? Okay, let's try this other bouncy ball that we used when we did weight and things like that and sorting. What do you think it will do? Will it sink or float? And why? And let's go ahead and drop it, see what happens. Wow. So those two objects were about the same size. About the same size. But you can clearly see that the bouncy ball here sunk right to the bottom. I mean, it even made a noise and went right to the bottom. And you can see the other bouncy ball is sort of floating, kind of in the middle there. Part of it's floating, a little bit of it's underwater, but it's floating. It's floating around. So why? I mean, they're both the same size. Shouldn't they both sank to the bottom or floated to the top? Why are they different? Why are they different? Okay. Some good things here. How about, this is kind of funny. How about a toothbrush? If you've ever brushed your teeth and you've dropped your toothbrush in the sink, you might already know that. But let's find out. Okay. What do you think? The toothbrush will sink or float? Here we go. Oh, It went to the bottom. It sunk to the bottom. Yes, it did. All right. How about our little toy spinner, little top here? Do you think it will sink or float? We'll find out here pretty soon. Whoa, look, oh, that's kind of fun. You can like spin it on top of the water. Wow, that's pretty awesome. Okay, that's too much fun right there. So it did float on top of the water. And this ball right here is a lot heavier than this little top. If you remember back when we did heavy or light, the top was the lightest object. And then we had the strange bouncy ball is definitely a lot heavier. So what's going on? Why isn't this thing sinking to the bottom? Very interesting. Okay. How about the world? We have the world ball, the squishy world ball. It's very large. It's the largest object so far. So obviously it's going to sink, right? Since it is the largest object. Don't large objects sink? Isn't that the rule? I don't know. We're going to find out. So what do you think? Our squishy world ball, what's it going to do? Sink or float? And we're going to find out here. Ready? Woo! It is floating. The world is floating along with our top. And you remember we actually measured those the other day, and the world ball is definitely a lot heavier than our top. But then our strange bouncy ball here is heavier than those two, and it's still floating. And then our regular bouncy ball has sunk to the bottom as well as our toothbrush. So very interesting. So what do you think is causing these items to float and these items to sink? Very interesting. It really doesn't have to do with the size. Okay. How about a hand lens? Very scientific hand lens here. What do you think it will do? Will it sink or float? Very interesting. This one might be tricky, actually. Let's see what happens. Aha! Very interesting. It's floating on top of the water. That's very strange, isn't it? I wonder why. Now, notice the way I placed it, too. So I kind of laid it flat, didn't I? I wonder if I put it in a different position, would it still float? So if I put it in like this way, will it float? Rather than leaving it flat. And we can find out. Let's try it. Wow. That time it sank. When I put it in sideways, it went right to the bottom. Okay. That's interesting. But when I put it this way, it's floating. How can that be? How can that be? How can it float that way, but if I just turn it sideways, it sinks? So this item can sink or float, basically. That is unreal. What is the difference? Something's happening there. Can you guys figure that out? Talk about it. Absolutely. And then my last item here is a battery. And like we saw the other day, the battery definitely is the heaviest of all the items. And we're going to see if it sinks or floats. So let's do this with the battery. Ready? Yeah, very heavy, very dense, went right to the bottom. So there's all our items. We can see what items sank to the bottom and what items floated to the top. We know the magnifying glass was very interesting because when I turned it sideways, and dropped it, it went right to the bottom. But when I lay it flat like that, and what I want you to think about is think about a design like a boat. It almost has kind of like a boat design, doesn't it? Kind of flat. If you also can see, it's got these little curves here. So when I lay it flat, something gets trapped underneath in this little pocket here. What do you think gets trapped under there? And that's the key, because I'm trapping something between the surface of the water and the hand lens. Something's getting trapped between those two that's actually helping it float. But if I turn it sideways, I lose that. So what could it be? And that is definitely the key for things that float or sink. So you guys have some discussion. A lot of fun. Hopefully you can do this in your classroom or around your house. Just grab some items and get like a little bin here, fill up some water, and predict what do you think would the item sink or float, and discuss. Think about why. What is that key? What is that ingredient that we need for something to float? All right, guys, great job. And stay tuned. I'm going to be right back because I'm going to use a digital site to see some other objects that may sink or float. So I hope you had a lot of fun. I'll see you soon, first graders.